Okay. Hi, everyone. Uh, Here at Catholic Arena, we decided that a few people had asked us to start maybe streaming and discussing some of the stuff because that we have on our website because um, people find videos, podcasts, things they can kind of listen to on their way to work, which for most people doesn't take too long now because most people are stuck at home at the minute, but a lot of people are saying that's an easier way to take in the information if they don't get a chance to read it. So we decided we were going to have a just a chat about some of the stuff going on in the church and the stuff affecting the church um, going into the year 2021. And I suppose just thinking about that, we're going to have a look back on the church in 2020 and how it's kind of led us to the state we're in now. There was a few months there, especially Easter and up to the mass closures in Ireland and the UK that happened in the winter, kind of from October towards leading up to Christmas, and then we kind of got back to normal for a bit, and then they shut down again. But there was a time there at the start where people were talking a lot about the church and kind of praising it for the effort it did and the funerals it was doing for people and all this other stuff. And there was a lot of campaigns to try to get mass going again. But it looks as though we're not only back in square one now, but nobody's putting up a fight. And the only mention of churches we hear now is people demanding that they be open to be used as vaccination centres, which is wild. So Jerome's here with me. Jerome, what do you think about where we're at heading into this year?
Well, the point you made there about it seemed like the church, the pushback they were given against the lockdowns, they seemed to be going along with it as we all were when it first started, because no one really knew where this thing was going. But then after a few months, when everyone could see the data, and a lot of sort of holes were appearing in sort of like the official narrative, a lot of people were thinking, well, is this really as dangerous as they are making it out to be? There's not like bodies lying down in the streets basically most of the time, like, and never actually. Um, and there was a small bit of after there was some requests from a few bishops to request that like masses be opened up, but like you said, they didn't really seem to put up too much of a pushback, did they? Um, and now it seems no bishop is really, they're kind of all falling into line, it seems, because the constant fear being put out by the media state apparatus. It's very, in fairness, it's actually very hard for a public official to question that, because they'll be pushed down immediately and called, or are you endangering the population? Do you want people to die? And of course, that will put Catholics even more on the back foot. It's a funny situation. It's very hard to for Catholics to publicly oppose this narrative, I think.
Yeah, and I think as well, it's it's gotten to a point where I like there's no amount of contradiction that can wake people up. I saw people I'll just try to get the quote up here now. There was something I read the other day. The Russian Cold War defector guy Yuri
Bezmenov.
Bezmenov, isn't it? And he had
I
this
think so,
quote
yeah.
where it was basically about giving people as much information as you can, but the people, they didn't know what to make of it. I have the quote coming up here and I'll just say it, but people now, like this week, what was there, 1,500 people come in from Brazil. I think it was 1,400 from South Africa. Did I read that one right? And,
Yeah.
no matter how much of this stuff happens, the papers had a thing last week that 30 people showed up to a funeral in Dublin, a Latin mass funeral, And they were saying, oh, well, this is five over the limit. And they were saying this is why we had such bad cases. And
Yeah.
nobody's brain honestly looks at that and thinks, well, that's what caused the bad cases. So I there's obviously something very complex and psychological going on here that people feel the need to do this. So it's very strange. And then with mass, then I mean, there was no cases linked to mass and no cases linked to anything in the churches, and yet we're kind of obliged to just go along with this. So um, people don't trust themselves to say, okay, well, there are no cases there. The other thing is like it's a year into this stuff now. It's a year into this stuff, and in other countries, New Zealand, Australia, lots of other places. I mean, it was common sense. If you're a passenger showing up from abroad, you'd be quarantined. You'd be put in a hotel 2 weeks or whatever it was. And now Ireland, in Ireland, they're only thinking about it now. Like, how can a country be this incompetent? I don't understand it. But on top of that, it's one thing if you're incompetent, but then to be so heavy-handed on people with the restrictions, especially with mass. And this was what Yuri Bezmenov described when it came to people who are demoralized. He said exposure to true information doesn't matter anymore when you're demoralized. A person who's demoralized is unable to assess true information. The facts tell nothing to him. Even if I shower him with information, with authentic proof, with documents, with pictures, even if I take him by force to the Soviet Union and show him a concentration camp, he'll refuse to believe it until he receives a kick in his fan bottom. When a military boot crashes his balls, then he will understand, but not before that. That's the tragedy of the situation of demoralization. And that's that's how it feels with the churches.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. One thing you were talking about there, the incompetence of the government. I think it's a mixture of incompetence plus complete acquiescence to um, foreign. And when I say globalist, it doesn't mean to sound nefarious. I'm basically just talking about the EU and the UN and WHO. It seems the government want to tick all the boxes in terms of like a free and open, like if on one hand they want to follow the COVID narrative as much as possible in terms of coming up with all these extremely stringent and very awkward restrictions, but at the same time they're not prepared to alter in any way the implicit contract they have with the UN in terms of unrestricted migration. And they're on about this apparently new strain. It's another part of this fear mechanism. Apparently, it's even deadlier than the current SARS-CoV-2 strain or whatever it's called. But at this, they're just not. And the regulations I was actually looking at over the last few days, they're extremely detailed. And in some ways, they look to be quite punitive as well. For example, they're talking about some building regulations. They do give some allowances for construction to go ahead. Funnily enough, one of the allowances is for social housing and sort of direct provision. But if you're building a house and you had planned to move in sometime this year, well, that's completely on hold. Perhaps if the house is going to be finished in the next few weeks, there might be some sort of allowance there. But getting back to my point, Michal Martin, when he was asked, should we not maybe close the borders or stop immigration, his response, and I'm paraphrasing, basically he said it would be unworkable. So he just dismissed that question out of hand. And he said, these are oftentimes essential workers. I would definitely question that. I mean, essential to who? Because these are the people also defining what essential means with all these
Mm.
restrictions. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, And so, yeah, so they, they hold all the cards. So I mean, there's just nothing you can do but try to, um, you know, get on. Like you have to just, we have to be as Catholics, we have to be prudent and realize that some things are out of our hands. It would be great if there was a political solution here, if there was a way to wake everybody up, but sometimes you have to realize that, you know, um, to anybody with half a brain, the way this has been managed has been like could not have been worse. Um, but I mean, we're not getting the help from the people in the church, in authority, um, and the stuff you're saying there about bringing in laws to punish people. Um, Nicolas Gomez de Villa, he said, dying societies accumulate laws, like dying men accumulate remedies. And our society now, not just in Ireland, but like Europe, the whole West, it's all about what you can't do. There's no optimism about what you can do, about how to encourage things. And it's like the people at the top they've just given up, and it's just nothing but negativity, and everything's a crisis with them. And, you know, um, there's just no positivity with these people. There's just no looking forward. And as you say, they just change the rules and they just make up the rules and apply them selectively to different people. And there was there was a headline last year. It was Black Lives Matter demonstration may have actually reduced COVID numbers in America. So they were saying that, the people
Yeah.
writing this were just making it up. So like we would never get that in the church. So like if there was a massive you know, procession tomorrow, I mean, do you think they'd put up procession may have actually reduced, amounts of people getting COVID? It's hard to imagine that they would actually do that. Um, so I think
Well,
going, yeah,
that's part of the issue as well. How Black Lives Matter has been pretty much lionized by the international media and by the by many corporate entities as well. In America, they were behind a lot of protests, which ended up with literally burning down neighborhoods in cities, causing massive destruction. And at the same time, Black Lives Matter were receiving corporate donations from the likes of, say, Amazon, for example. And in Ireland, where we have never had a historic issue um, with Black people. I mean, the history of Black people in Ireland is fairly recent, really. Um, but we don't have, say, the baggage that the US has with Black people. So I was very actually confused when Black Lives Matter protests came to Dublin during the summer because it didn't make any sense. And the media didn't seem to criticize any aspects of the Black Lives Matter protests. But a few weeks ago, a few people I knew were at a rally, a Catholic rally at RTE, protesting that ridiculous skit they had in New Year's Eve, and the guards basically didn't. They were threatening to arrest people, but when that gentleman was shot by the armed support unit a few weeks ago, there was several days of protests um, by the African community in Ireland, and there was no arrests made. There was no and you know straight away that if there was any, it would have been highlighted all over the Twitter sphere and in the media. So the government are quite obviously taking sides in this. If you are Black Lives Matter, it's basically a hands-off approach. But if you're campaigning for the right to basically go to mass or to protest, quite a shocking insult to your faith, that's basically not allowed.
yeah. I mean, yeah. And the thing. I mean, the thing about Black Lives Matter is there was such a strange phenomenon seeing that in Ireland. I mean, England have gone really over the top with it. Um, with sport and things like that. But I was trying to understand, um, and I was thinking a little bit. I mean that maybe it was just the pace of that happening so quick that it seems so strange. And there's lots of other American things that are part of our society now that we actually just take for granted as if it should belong here when maybe it shouldn't, you know? So
Yeah.
maybe the Black Lives Matter thing just happened so quick that we were like, well, this doesn't belong here. This seems very strange, you know? And maybe we haven't realized that there's a lot of other things that happened an awful lot quicker. That if you look, or that happened, sorry, more gradually. That if you look at them, you kind of say, well, actually, maybe these don't belong here either, you know? And Ireland, Ireland at the minute, it's really, really struggling for an identity, you know? It's like a couple of years ago, they had this Oktoberfest thing in on the Keys in Dublin. And I mean,
Mm.
I know it's not uncommon for places around the world to maybe do an Oktoberfest theme thing, and it's a good corporate event to get people going. But it's Ireland at the minute would would go along with anything because it's really not sure about its identity, and it goes back to I think what Pope Benedict said, that the challenge for the church in this decade or in this century, it's not Islam, not Hinduism, it's not even atheism as such. He said it's Buddhism. I know Buddhists technically don't, uh, you know, we don't include them as religions that we say, oh, they worship the same God as us. Um, but what Benedict said was that he said that they worship the God within, and so in its various forms, like we've all these things people are getting into, like wellness and mindfulness, and just wishy-washy things that don't focus on any external truth. And one of the things about them is that there was a program on last night. I didn't watch it, thank God, but it was Mary McAleese was on a walk with Roz Purcell. She's one of these influencer people, and
Oh, yes.
basically, I saw people on Twitter saying that Roz was talking about how well she's. I think they went to a mass rock or something, and she was saying, "Well, I'm a bit of a what was it, a vegan, yeah, I don't know, neo-pagan, I don't know, yoga person, whatever it was." And so it's like what Chesterton said: if you don't believe in anything, when people stop believing in God, they don't believe in nothing, they believe in anything. And so the thing with the Black Lives Matter thing is it has everybody, a lot of people have pointed this out, it has traits of uh, religious behavior in it, that they have certain rituals, they take the new stuff, they've their uh, slogans that they all have to say, and then there's the fact, if you're a non-believer, you're the worst person in the world and stuff. And so it's kind of for young people who really have never, there's a young generation of Irish people who never really had anything substantial to attach themselves to. So they're kind of looking at this going, well, I can be a part of this, and I can be a good person, and I can be all that, this and that. And the interesting thing about it is that, COVID has elements to that too. So this, because they're on about, they're taking pictures of COVID. It's weird they insist on taking pictures of this, but when they're vaccinating people in the cathedrals in England, and I think they're going to start doing it in Ireland,
Yeah.
they're, there's this quasi-religious kind of thing to it. And then the whole thing of, as we say, the rituals of getting out and clapping for the healthcare workers and all this stuff. It's yeah, it's people. It's people have this. It's their innate need to be religious, but they put it onto something else. Like for a long time in England, it was these memorial days and the poppy and all that sort of stuff. And so England, I don't know. I think England kind of an interesting one to look at because they know these things. Like football, you have to go watch the football on a Sunday.
Mm.
With the poppy, you have to wear the poppy, show your thing, and a lot of the churches have pictures of the soldiers and all this sort of stuff. So yeah, so
Yeah.
they've really embraced the whole idea Black Lives Matter as religion, as COVID as religion, you know. And because of that, I mean, this is the thing. This is the thing. Eh, Because of that, any merit that's uh, in those behaviors, they can actually kind of throw them out the window by being so extreme about it, putting the wrong kind of focus on it, you know. Whereas if
Yes.
you know,
There's a lot of like hectoring and guilt induction and actually blame as well, because the constant narrative now is that even that innocuous, it's that annoying slogan, masking for a friend, which is a play on the term like
mm,
asking for a friend. Um, like that jokey thing, like when you really want to know something for yourself, you say, "Oh, only asking for a friend." So the masking for a friend thing, and we're all in it together and hold firm. So you have that sort of like carrot type things of, oh, be kind and look out for one another. But on the other hand, what they're also saying is you basically need to stay at home, because if you don't, you're basically endangering the lives of other people. And if you are, you're irresponsible. And it's almost they're getting to the point where they, and especially with the contact tracing, what I'm seeing more in the media, I can't come up with any specific examples, but they are coming up with narratives like, oh, this latest outbreak was attributed to party X or event Y.
mm,
And and the only thing that's stopping people's names from being published, I think, is only because of GDPR, because there's quite stringent
yeah.
protections there.
But you remember,
Um,
like at first, when someone had it, and people were like, "Well, can you tell us where the school was? Can you tell us what town it was in, so we know?" And they were like, "No, we can't do that." And now they've gone the opposite, you know.
yes,
So that's another one of these contradictions. Yeah, and it's
and
like,
they're also they if they'll come up with these outliers like the long COVID thing, and there'll be a newspaper article about maybe this middle-aged woman who's had COVID for several months. Like she's not dead, she's able to give a news interview, and so that's an outlier. And then you might see RT ran a story of this teenager who had COVID and he was on crutches apparently. So they're pushing out these examples. Oh, it's not just like elderly people, and it's hitting like teenagers and middle-aged people, but they do seem to be working very hard to push these outlier type situations, which they actually are when you look at the data, to scare more people to say, listen, everyone, it can take anyone, and no one is safe, basically.
yeah, and I think, I suppose for the general population, I mean, it's understandable that they're maybe taken in a little bit by this, or like when I say taken in, that they're petrified and can't point out when the contradictions come along, you know? Um, I suppose for us as Catholics, we probably remember the referendum in 2018 when, there was one interview where Leo Varadkar was on the radio and he said, if we don't repeal the eighth, women who die who are pregnant are going to be kept alive on a ventilator, you know? And you can imagine people going, well, he's a doctor. Like, he's telling me that he knows what he's saying. Um, I mean, this has literally happened once in 20 years that this happened to someone, you know?
Yeah.
And so, the one thing they wouldn't do is talk about the majority of cases. It's the one thing they wouldn't do. And so, yeah, we're living in this very, very strange time. But I feel like the time we're in now, though, at least we have access to more information. And I feel like it's a culmination of decades and decades of this stuff. I mean, if you go back to 9/11, um, I mean, a lot of people obviously were fully convinced that Saddam, was gonna kill them. They were fully
Yeah.
convinced that if you didn't kill Saddam, this wasn't going to be whatever. And then, do you know what it was? The information then afterwards was so difficult for people to process that they've been hoodwinked. I mean, a lot of people died. This was unbelievable that, so many people were complicit in this. And a lot of people found it very, very hard to deal with that. So people have just kind of forgotten about it now. Even though technically it's still on, and
Some
it,
some of the UN weapons inspectors who were like fully they fully believed that there was weapons of mass destruction, and they were given interviews at CNN and everything, and they went out there and they looked under a lot of rocks and they did exhaustive, because they were pretty much given free reign. Iraq basically gave them free reign to look anywhere. And when these guys, these UN's weapons inspectors, then started saying, we don't really, we might have got something wrong, guys, because we're actually not seeing any evidence of that. The media didn't really give them much of an audience because they weren't really going along with the narrative, because the news networks at the time, they were salivating at the prospect of another war because their ratings would shoot up, because they knew from the first Gulf War, when George Bush Sr. kicked Iraq out of Kuwait, that's when really CNN became watched nonstop by many people. And of course, when you have eyeballs on the news all the time, ad revenues shoot up into stratospheric levels. So when someone goes, my point was, whenever someone goes against the narrative, they're pretty much sidelined. As often happens in narratives like these, the truth is just seen as irrelevant if it gets in the way of a narrative.
yeah. And then there was that guy, Dr. David Kelly. He was one of the people who kind of had said, there was WMDs, and he apparently committed suicide. I know some people doubted it, but he died anyways, like straight after
Yeah,
the war started,
very
which is
interesting.
unbelievable. But it's how, like, I feel like we could have a measured conversation on, this sort of stuff, on the flow of information and what we're selectively told and what we're allowed to know. But I feel personally like a lot of Catholics get very bogged down in this sort of stuff. Even like this, early last year, I found Bill Gates. I found more Catholics were talking about Bill Gates than the fact that they couldn't go to mass. Um, like how do we kind of how do we keep people, you know, how do we keep people kind of focused on what's actually kind of useful? Do you know what I mean? Like, because
Yeah,
a lot of Catholics kind of begin in this thing with Bill Gates can put chip into me and all this stuff, and um, like, you know, it's kind of
it,
getting to a point where they're confusing the worst case. Again, they're kind of doing what the opposite are doing. They're taking the worst case scenario and they're saying, well, this is what's going to happen now, instead of kind of being more productive. You know what I mean? I feel like that's making our job and trying to get mass back and things like that utterly hopeless. I feel like more Catholics are invested in telling everybody Bill Gates is the Antichrist rather than just trying to get mass back on.
yeah, it's unfortunate. There seems to be two groups that are predominant. One group is the ones, because let's face it, we the most of the people who would go to mass would be in an older age demographic, who would have been they've pretty much been conditioned to watch RTE all the time and take in what they say. And RTE is just like a fear factory right now, and they're being basically just scared into even thinking about going to mass. And
Mm,
I saw some one of those box of envelopes in a neighbor's house that the parish sends around
yeah,
for dues, and I can't see a lot of those being sent in, because if you're not going to mass every week, you're not going to think, well, sure, why do I need to send in some dues to them? So I think the parish revenues will plummet, I think a lot of parishes will start to see closures over the next 5 years, possibly even sooner. But on the
Yeah,
other hand, the other demographic of Catholics would be people who, now I suppose you have to admire them in one aspect because they're not being passive consumers of news, but they're looking down rabbit holes. And I'm not even saying they're necessarily wrong, but they're overly focused on something that may not be the it actually isn't the biggest current concern that should be worrying them, you know.
yeah. And a lot of them have already kind of resigned themselves to kind of um to the fact that the churches are closing. The people who are in charge, a lot of them just see one trajectory for the church in the coming years. They don't see any hope, any possibility. Like they would accuse the likes of us of being the negative ones. Yeah, for a lot of them, they don't see any possibility of young people getting on board, especially young men. And for a lot of them who are in charge of the church, there's they're just thinking about wanting to add up the numbers in the coming years and manage a steep decline. There was an interview Dermot Farrell did his first interview as Archbishop, and he did it with Patsy McGarry in the Irish Times, and it was it was depressing. It was really depressing. The whole interview was just about how churches are going to close up. I don't know. We might get women deacons, whatever. I don't really care. He was like, yeah, sure, maybe we'll get married priests, whatever. He was like,
Yeah,
he was just saying to himself, look, it was like, this isn't really my problem. Just do whatever. We'll see what happens. And I think that this negativity, if you don't share their negativity, it's almost like people discourage you. So the church in Ireland has become this little niche for a lot of people that they don't want everybody being part of it. They don't want to attract all these new people. And so the kind of church that younger Catholics and more traditional Catholics, and I'd probably add in even people who are what we will call charismatic Catholics, even though I don't know how much of Catholic Arena's audience are charismatic Catholics, but even them, they have some um, picture in their head of what the next few years are going to look like, and it's mostly a positive one. That's the important thing to remember. It's mostly a positive one, and it's about deepening people's faith, getting more people involved. It's about enthusiasm, and it really feels like a lot of people in the church have just resigned themselves to the fact that the the parish numbers are going to dwindle, the money coming in is going to dwindle, and rather than deal with it, a lot of them just have their heads in the sand, And that right now in the church, parishes are going to close up, but yet there's going to still be millions going into these people like Trogra, going into some of these schools trusts that actually damage the faith, and so it's crazy what's happening. The biggest problem with the church now is they're just ticking the box of these NGOs and saying, we have NGOs, the NGOs are doing great, they have great public profile. Yeah, all looks pretty good. And so I think if there's one problem in the church, it's that they are measuring success by these NGOs rather than measuring success by how many people are believing, how many people are being attracted to the church. And if you speak directly to them about this stuff, they kind of make out like, like you're the one who's being negative here. You say, well, I'm not being negative. I'm thinking about people. I'm thinking about the church. So you're the one thinking about some guy sitting in an office trying to stop climate change in Botswana or something.
is one of the he's an archbishop, one of the four archbishops in Ireland. So he does want to get his message out. But the problem with talking to someone like Patsy McGarry is that Patsy McGarry is, if you really look into him, he's no friend of the church, and he constantly tries to just undermine it at any time possible. And it just seems to me like there's a certain naivete in the clergy in terms of the media. As far as I can see, the media is not a friend of the church, and I would even go so far as to say it might even be the enemy of the church. So I would like to see the clergy and the hierarchy just getting more like savvy about communications. Like there's other ways to get their message out.
Yeah.
There is social media. There's even their masses. Like when masses resume, there still are, okay, numbers will be down, but a significant numbers of people will still want to go back to mass. And I would
Yeah.
just like to see them more engaged with the realpolitik of how the world works. The Irish state media apparatus are just hostile to Catholicism, and they have been. If you, I arguably they've been like that for the past several years, or if not even the past several decades.
Yeah, I find it strange that in the United States, let's say, I feel like the church there has really moved with the times. I think the past 10 years, right, the bishops were a bit reluctant initially to the kind of new media that was coming along, like Church Militant and Taylor Marshall and people like that. But I feel like now they've really gotten bored with it. And sometimes people criticize him for some of his comments. But Bishop Barron is an example. He has the YouTube channel that's very good. Even if people disagree with all the stuff that's in it, but I mean it's very effective. It gets really big numbers. And a lot of the
Yeah,
US bishops, I think, are really, and the US church in general, I think, for whatever problems you might say, and like sometimes in the Catholic arena, people feel like the pages the page of the website are having a go at Americans, but the criticism is always aimed at the people who are in charge of the United States, not the church itself or American Catholics. But it's I feel like the church over there is way more cutting edge than here, and even this, the Father Mike Schmitz, was it him who had the Bible podcast? It was number one the past few weeks on iTunes, and
yes,
these guys are just they're just young guys, clever guys. We have those people in the church in Ireland now too, but it's as though they're not being encouraged to make the most of kind of the talents that they have, and so the people in the church in Ireland are doing good work. I know it's on a smaller scale and stuff, but it's kind of like the bishops then would still rather go to um, go for their punishment to interviews with people who just take them out of um, out of context half the time. And I remember the interview after the referendum when they showed Ian and Martin saying, "Oh, abortion should be safe, legal, and rare." Now, was he actually saying he wanted that? No, he was in the middle of a conversation and he was trying to say that. This is what they said, but people actually hold him to it. That was obviously what he said, but he made the mistake of talking to them. You can't talk to these people. These journalists are just not worth talking to. And the bishops here, I don't know what it is. It's like they're just totally out of date. And in America, they have that bit of forward thinking. And here, there's no forward thinking. Everything here is, well, this is the way we've always done it. We're going to keep doing it this way. And they're just reacting to things as they happen. And I feel like it's going to be that way for another while. And you're seeing some people, okay, you're probably just the one bishop at the moment, Bishop Fonzie. And Fonzie he's on YouTube, he's going out and doing these things where he's blessing the city with the knockdown and stuff. And the images just give people a lift. They attract people. People look at them and they go, this is a guy who believes. Why does he believe so strongly? Maybe I want to believe the way he does. That's what attracts people. And but then you have some of the other bishops, and they're doing stuff like the priest in Roscommon who had the imam praying at mass, and then Diarmuid Martin. Their thing was they kept going back to saying, "Oh, what about the Pope and Assisi with all these other people?" But I mean, was that a success? No, it wasn't a success at all. Ever since then,
yeah,
the relationship between Christians and Muslims has gotten far worse. Was it the Pope's fault? No, but I'm saying it didn't make it better. And then, of course, after I think the original Assisi afterwards, I think at the first one, if I'm not mistaken, there was a controversy where they were all praying together, and then I think afterwards, then they had to pray in their own private areas, you know. But going
Yeah.
and doing that when everyone was in lockdown, I mean, we sometimes people complain about the American church. The American church would just say, "I'm not doing it." And so here, it goes back to this idea of the church as an NGO. It's kind of like they're like, well, hang on, I'm the head of this thing. We're like the number one NGO in the country. So if the other NGOs are organizing this, I got to go and be a part of it and, um, represent my NGO. So I think, as lay people, I don't know what it is we can do. I think in America, what happened was the likes of Church Militant and Taylor Marshall, they just went for it. They're not everybody's cup of tea, but they have an audience, they're effective. But they're just two examples. There's other guys. I remember there was a page a few years ago, the Catholic Gentleman. That was the first one really to get on board with Catholic stuff on Instagram and everything. It was just an excellent page. And it ended up that these guys cut out a niche for themselves and they showed that people were interested in it. And then it seems to me, I know people complain about the U.S. bishops, but it seems to me that they're getting on board with this a little bit now, and they're a bit more forward thinking. But the forward thinking, I just don't see it here.
Yeah. To your point about like the American Catholics being more innovative in communications, like the Franciscans in Limerick, I believe that they seem to be mostly American guys, and they have a fantastic Facebook page, and they're constantly on it, saying mass, talking about different things. But it's funny. We do like Irish people are great and everything, but there's probably something in our culture we don't like to blow our trumpet too much, or to stray too far away in terms of like innovation, especially with the faith. Americans don't have the cultural baggage of being criticized as Catholics, because most Americans are, to my eyes, they'd be secular, whereas in Ireland, pretty much all people born, say, up to maybe 30 years ago, they would all have been christened, even if they publicly espouse to be atheists. Most Irish people, at least on paper, they were cradle, like they were baptized Catholics. And if any Catholics who tend to speak up, even if we wouldn't necessarily agree with them ourselves, perhaps we might see them as maybe not very fervent, or possibly even liberal. It doesn't matter if you're public and you're Catholic and you speak up in any way for defense of the faith and defense of tradition and traditional and morality. You're just taken apart viciously by the media and social media, and you basically you have no comeback, basically,
Yeah.
But it's funny, another point I kind of want to make as well. You talked about Mary McAleese, and a lot of the things she says, it makes me laugh, really. One thing, I believe she has a doctorate in theology, does she?
No, canon law.
Canon law. And I think I saw her, I think I read somewhere that she wanted to study canon laws in order to better able to criticize it. So
yeah, probably.
the motivations of someone like that is it's kind of shocking, really, in its audacity.
She reminds me of, like, to me, like, so ordinary people will talk about the Catholicism they reject, and they'll say, "Oh, all these old men and all this old thing where the church owned everything and all this stuff." And I would say for our generation, what we actually have to reject is these pompous upper class, busybody, a lot of them women, which is, it just, church in Ireland has just become, most days, depends where, it's different places. But the people in parish councils, other things, a lot of them are women, like Mary McAleese, and who just sees the church as a place where she can just have a go at everybody. You know what I mean? Everyone just backs out of the way. Oh, sorry, Madam President, sorry, Mary. And she just says, I have a doctor in Canada. Get out of my face, and I'm the president.
Yeah.
Be quiet. And she wouldn't get away with this anywhere else, but she enjoys kind of lauding it over people in the church. So for our generation, I think it's important to talk about the fact that the type of church that we want, we're actually having to go against the authorities in the church, which is people like Mary McAleese.
Yeah. Yeah. What are your thoughts about, I brought up the point there, the demographics, the age demographics in the Catholic Church. And of course, like you probably have the same experience when masses were opened, it leans heavily. You can just see like it's mostly a grey congregation. Are you hopeful, or do you have any like estimate or predictions about the likelihood of drawing more people coming back to the faith?
Yeah, I think so. Like if you think to yourself that um, in other religions, sometimes people will go into bookshops and they'll just browse the bookshop and they might pick one up, let's say let's say if it was another religion like Buddhism or something like that, and that might be their starting point or the reference point. And the same would go for if you're going and picking up a new political idea. Normally it starts with a book or something like that. And so these videos that are being made by a lot of those outlets and the books they're making and the other things to go with them, if you inspire even 1,000 people to join the faith, I mean, that's a decent number. And if each of them inspires only one person, that's a good number too. Is it enough to cause a wholesale change? I don't know. I feel like, yeah, we're in a strange spot because half of me feels like we need big political changes soon. And then half of me looks at lots of the examples around the world where politically things were terrible. But I mean, somehow the church managed to grow. And you could probably count the United States in that. I mean, even now, it feels like things are terrible in the States, but the church is growing. And even if you take a place like Iran, there's lots of stories coming out of somewhere like Iran that the faith is growing there too. So it's hard to strike that balance when we're talking about it between the human side of things and the spiritual side of things, because there's stuff moving and changing in a way that we can't see. And if you take the Americas, I mean, can you imagine being in America in 1491 and then, Columbus shows up the next year? Like, you had no way of knowing how things were going to change. And so I think, yeah, we can just I suppose that was the point I was thinking of asking you about with the conspiracy theories, that we can only do what we can do and then hope God helps us with the rest of them, because, some things are just out of our control. But those American people, the one thing I'd say is they are doing what they can do. But I don't think we're doing what we can do in Ireland, you know?
No. Now we are actually having, because of like the internet, we are getting the benefit of the growth of the resurgence of Catholicism in America through these media channels, because and they're actually like, for example, I believe Youth 2000, it might be an American entity, .net or Net Ministries, even this program, Exodus 90, which is a program for young men uh, to just grow in faith. It's a series of sacrifices and prayer over 90 days. A lot of Irish men are doing that as well. You might have dropped out there, but sure. I'll
No,
keep
it was
talking
just I was
anyway.
just muting it.
Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah.
And it's when you actually like, I'm not sure a lot of like, even I suppose when I came back to the faith, I mean, I suppose it might be a common enough story. I was an atheist, and I just got, it just seemed very empty, and I slowly, just by a series of different cultural events, I slowly became, just questioned the liberal, materialist narrative, and slowly came back to the faith. I mean, ultimately, I mean, let's get down to brass tacks here. I was basically, God called me back to the faith. Is how it actually worked, you know. But in my own mind, I could say, oh, I observed this, therefore I did that, and made my own decision. Um, and one thing that I was struck by, um, I suppose, in my years of the wilderness as an atheist, I thought, well, why would you want to go back to Catholicism? It's basically, it's an unthinking dogma where you just unquestionably go along with all these sets of rules and everything, and it's all based on fear and guilt and everything. And when I came back and started really like consuming those channels that you mentioned, which were hugely beneficial to me, in growing my awareness and knowledge, it's the realization that it's not just going to mass. It's actually, you're being called to study the catechism, and which isn't, it's not like, oh, these are all the rules. You're frequently challenged to just constantly reach spiritually, and give of yourself. And it's to be a good Catholic, it's actually quite a hard thing to do. um, but as Catholics, we're constantly called to stretch, and to try to persevere every day. And like, I find it very enriching, even intellectually. There's a lot of, like, one of the greatest philosophers of all time happens to be a Catholic, Thomas Aquinas. um, Arguably one of the greatest philosophers um, ever to have lived. And if you just studied like the depth and richness of his writings, um, but what you have, unfortunately, is these people who are like Richard Dawkins. And now people like Richard Dawkins have been roundly trounced in debates. But of course, they're not the ones that are publicized. What are publicized is when some Christian asks him a question, and he just ridicules him on the stage, and
Mm.
they don't get a retort, and they're not allowed to come back, basically. But that's one thing that inspires me about being a Catholic, is just how there's always something new to learn. There's always a way that you can be better. Like, even the concept of loving your enemies, it's quite profound. It's so, and it's so difficult. But we're called to do it. And it's ultimately, I suppose, another aspect of that is that, on a pure spiritual level, loving your enemies is tied in with forgiveness, and those two things means what hate dissipates if you replace hatred with it, which actually praying for someone's redemption. It has massive, like, I mean, therapeutic benefits when you replace hate with love and prayer for someone, to like, even praying for Simon Harris to be called to God, to because he was instrumental, of course, in the overturning of the referendum. He might, I mean, just take it, Simon Harris may actually have the best. He may believe that he is right, and
Mm.
that's the fundamental problem. Like, not actually assuming that people are evil. That a lot of these people who we believe are acting in evil ways, they think they're actually acting very genuinely, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, and yeah, it's interesting what you're saying about the things that come with it, the challenges, because a lot of people they they're fed. A lot of people, they're fed a very simplistic view of Christianity that they get from The Simpsons or something. They think it's just Ned Flanders, and
Yes.
they've forgotten how different, how complicated it is, and how you go to Argentina or Mexico, and it's a very different Catholicism from the ones that Irish people have in their head, which is the idea of something like Father Ted or something. So it seems like people actually would prefer it to be simplistic, and they accuse Christians of having a simplistic perspective on the universe, on life, on the meaning of life. But actually, it's the other way around. Like, I don't know who was that said it, but somebody said atheism is the saddest form of wishful thinking, because atheism is just like, well, I don't know, no God, it all just happened, bang, whatever. But if they use their intellect to kind of investigate into that, use their reason, they'll see that. And like the gifts of the Holy Spirit are wisdom, understanding, counsel, fortitude, knowledge, piety, and then fear of the Lord. But the important ones there that a lot of people are looking for are fortitude and knowledge and understanding. Because a lot of people are so afraid now, they're so anxious. And whether it's COVID or anything else, a lot of people's things come down to their fear. And if they looked into it a lot deeper, whether it's with Aquinas or whoever, they'd find that there's a solid basis um, for Catholic thinking. Like, we're not just making it up off of the top of our heads, and so it's built into the world that's kind of around us. Like, one of the things I was thinking about earlier when we were talking about Black Lives Matter was that Fulton Sheen once said that he said communism won't be defeated, right? He said communism will have to become Catholic. Now, it was a strange comment, and I was trying to work my head around, like, what is he talking about? But I suppose the point he made was that you'll have to, obviously, communism had such wide support for a reason. So, how do you take, maybe there was a 0.01% of good in it. I don't know what it was, caring for the poor or something. Not in practice, but in theory. But
Yeah.
so he was saying you have to change it into something that's Catholic. So, with things like Black Lives Matter, I mean, people who are involved in that stuff, I mean, surely they know that, or, well, surely if they looked into it, they'd see that people's self-worth, people's worth is external to us. It's, it's not subjective. It comes from God, that every person, like Pope Benedict said, each of us is willed, each of us is loved, each of us is necessary. But they don't have that in their understanding of the world. And also this idea of privilege and guilt. They talk about Catholic guilt. Well, the thing is, if you have Catholic guilt, you can go to confession and everything. You're forgiven. God works in your life again. But if you have
No, no, yeah.
colonial guilt or white guilt, you can't do that. You know.
Yes. Yes.
Um,
Exactly.
so it's a good way to tell these people, you're not. The reason you're getting this wrong is that you're starting in the wrong place. You're starting in the wrong place, and that's why you're coming up with the wrong solution at the end of it. So they're starting with an equation, and then they're working the way through, but it's coming out totally wrong. And so it's why even something like the Ten Commandments, there's a reason why the first commandment is, "I am the Lord your God. Don't have strange gods before me." So
Hmm.
what they're saying, what God's saying there is, you have to start with me. I'm the beginning of everything. If you start anywhere else, your heart might be in the right place, with other things, but you're not going to come to the right solution.
Yes, and Christopher Hitchens would say of that, it's like as if God is like this vain entity who is so insecure that he needs us to adore him just for his sake, when it's actually the other way around. It's for us. It's
Yeah,
quite it kind of struck me how like even when I kind of was an atheist, it just seemed to be like such an infantile interpretation of God himself, you know.
yeah. And you just wonder if, there was, you just wonder if these people have really, really contemplated a lot of stuff. And you can look into their lives and see that they didn't necessarily. Like, if you think of Hitchens, I mean, Hitchens died young because of his lifestyle. his love of carnal things, his love of food and drink and things like that. Um,
Yeah.
and if you
Yes.
think of, you know, if it, there's a famous film um, about these Carthusian monks, um, and there's a scene in it. The film's called Into Great Silence. It's a documentary. Have you ever watched it?
No, never heard of that one.
It's uh, it's excellent. I'll send you. I think it's all on YouTube, but there's a
Okay.
scene in it where there's this monk. So these guys are silent, or silent most of the time anyway. And there's a scene in it where this monk who went blind is speaking, and he says that he thanks God every day for making him blind because it reminds him of his mortality. It reminds him of the fact that he's only human. And so,
Yeah.
I mean, there's this idea in Ireland especially. There's this idea that, if you're a Catholic, you're soft, or you're afraid of life. You don't want to face the realities of life. And then you see that powerful stuff, and whoever made that film, they took a very powerful thing, and they put it out there for people to hear. And you realize that these people are so strong on the inside. And when you hear Christians all around the world being persecuted and stuff, and just something other people can't comprehend. And so I'd say that we'll go back to what we were saying about the American media at the minute. The Catholic media in America is that um, they are doing a good job with the profound stuff that's going on, bringing it to people and letting them see it.
Yes. And these sidewalk ministries and things like that. Like that's one thing. I mean, even an atheist who doesn't, isn't necessarily like extremely pro-abortion. Like even there's an atheist who's technically pro-choice, but he finds the idea of abortion uncomfortable at a minimum. Looking at those sidewalk ministries of these priests, and like of course the media narrative is that they're harassing and shouting at women going into these abortion clinics, when the reality is, if it was covered honestly, they would just see it's these priests and lay people just trying to get a woman's attention before she goes in, to let her know that she actually does have options, because ultimately there's a human life involved. And I have yet to come across a testimony of a mother who was going to abort her child and didn't, and regretted having the child. On the other hand,
Yeah,
I've read several testimonies of women who were about to go into the abortion clinic, and they were just, someone mentioned something to them. And again, they're not saying like, don't be so selfish and don't do this, and like, it's not about you. It's always like messages of love. And they decided to have their child, and they are so grateful that someone actually pulled them from the brink of abortion. um, and even the concept of, during the referendum, all these scare scenarios. Oh, what if there's a rape? Well, actually, rape is a horrible thing, and abortion doesn't fix it. Abortion punishes the baby, and it's many women who have been raped, who are aborted. They don't really. It's almost worse sometimes, because it doesn't fix any of the horrible pain that was done to her. And women who have conceived in rape, I mean, some, of course, the pro-abortion narrative would be that, oh, that would be so cruel, because every day she would be reminded of her attacker, when the reality is, every day when they look at their baby, even though it was conceived in rape, is this beautiful child, which is now in my life. um, but slowly these messages are, even though like the media just suppress these narratives, but they are out there, thanks to the internet and all these amazing new media entities, like mainly in America. But I mean, I suppose we're in our own humble little way, doing the same thing in Ireland, and we're starting to gain a following ourselves, and that's all through God's grace as well, of course.
Yeah, and that's it. I mean, it's people who've had success with this stuff in the States. I mean, you've big numbers in the States of Catholics, um, and so you've a bigger pool to kind of choose from, and you've lots of money in the States, so that doesn't harm it either. But I think the
Yeah.
big thing is that the Americans are naturally very enthusiastic people and positive people. So I think Catholicism actually, their type of Catholicism, it resonates well with people here, even though, like at first, I think some of the Catholicism from the States, people here are kind of like, all right, this guy, what's going on here? When they come across American Catholics, maybe some of it probably suits Americans better than here, but I do think the positivity, that's the one great thing with it, is that they don't have. So it's like what you were saying about Ireland with Black Lives Matter. Why were Irish people so devoted to it? We don't have that guilt here. But in with Catholicism in America, it's like that. They don't feel any negativity about the past, and so they're so optimistic. So yeah, it's an interesting thing. Where I suppose we're in, we're kind of caught between two worlds. That it would be great if there was more Irish media in this regard, but if there was more Irish media in this regard, would it just be imitating the Americans, or would it be coming up with its own identity? I suppose the only way to come up with your own identity is just to go with it and see how it pans out. Um, yeah. So yeah, I'm kind of just thinking to myself now, if you totally transferred their way of doing things to here. Um,
Well, no, I agree. We shouldn't necessarily, because like there are some aspects of it that to use that term, it sometimes is a bit cringe. Like the Our Father, when I was in Mass in America, sometimes people start holding hands, and I'm a it just seems. But then again, that might be suited to that culture. But
yeah,
we can certainly we have, I suppose, an Irish sort of like now on the positive aspects of Irish Catholicism, like our missionaries have went worldwide and have brought like education. They've saved lives all over the world, have helped people. So that's an extremely positive example. Our missionaries around the world, um,
yeah.
in America as well, I suppose. Yeah, starting at these schools and everything like that.
So finishing on a positive, then, what's one thing you'd be optimistic about in the church this year?
I suppose it's like the since returning to the faith, it's the incredible number of very devoted, enthusiastic Catholics that I meet in mass and online. Then, of course, and you do form like friendships based on that. So for myself, even though COVID has been a serious detriment to the church, I think it's also steeled the wool of a lot of Catholics as well, because when it comes down to it, we're constantly encouraged in the Bible to not be afraid, and even though things look bleak, just rest on God. And I think more people will get that message. So I suppose that's ultimately what I'd be optimistic about.
Yeah, yeah, I'd probably be along the same lines and thinking that, a few weeks back there, maybe it's a couple of months ago, I watched the Association of Catholic Priests had up on their website their AGM. So I decided to click on the stream for my sins. And on
Okay.
it, I mean, they were so. Some of them, the sad thing was, some of them were on about really good work they were doing in their parishes with people who are in need and stuff like that. But then some of them were kind of, like one priest actually goes, I love lockdown. I love being inside, not seeing people, you know. And what I found is
That's
that
incredible.
they seemed very defeated on it. So I did kind of feel sorry for them. They seemed very defeated. Like, look, it's done, church is done, whatever. Just get some women up to do the Macarena or something. I don't know. I'm just gonna stay in. But I think that type of defeatism now is so contrasted with the people who want to speak up for the faith that it's that's going to come to the fore a bit more now. The people who are positive and the people who are productive, they're coming to the fore a bit, I think, a bit more in the past year. And I think the people who are maybe a bit negative or whatever, that's kind of receding a bit. So yeah, interesting times nonetheless. And I think,
Yeah.
look, hopefully sometime before the end of the year we get we get past back. But I mean,